The Hunter class can be an insanely good class for soloing, second only to a well-geared Blood DK. Old raids, content old and new, and even current 5-man content are all possible to solo. Today, I'm going to be breaking down everything you need to be successful at this. Talents, pet talents, ability breakdowns, and more. I'm Scorpob, and this is my guide to Hunter soloing in Cataclysm. This guide is going to assume you already know the basic gameplay of a Hunter, such as rotation, gear, stats, basic macros, and abilities. This isn't a raiding guide. Hunter soloing can be very fun and rewarding, and can often feel like you're playing it and controlling two characters at once, which more often than not is with your pet being the tank and yourself being the DPS. Soloing isn't completely about dealing as much damage as possible, but is more about the survivability of yourself and your pet. As long as the boss doesn't deal as much damage as you can heal, you can kill it. Keeping yourself alive is your number one priority, just behind keeping your pet alive, which is the second most important thing. It is still important to deal out big damage, however, if there are certain timers in the fight you must meet, or if a boss has a tight enrage timer. Let's explain talents. Marksmanship Hunter is by far the bread and butter spec for soloing old content in my opinion, for several reasons. The ability Chimera Shot has the secondary effect of healing you for 5% of your total health. This is a strong self-heal on yourself that will naturally use in your marksmanship rotation, since you will not have to make any major changes to your rotation to bake this ability in, and since this ability is on a relatively short cooldown, this ability alone makes marksmanship the strongest self-sustain of any Hunter spec. The readiness ability is also very important. Being able to instantly reset all of your major Hunter cooldowns is an extremely versatile and strong ability to have. Instant 2 Chimeras, instant 2 Rapid Fires, instant 2 Feign Death, and more. The possibilities with this ability are nearly endless in helping you survive, and thus is a huge extra point for marksmanship. If chosen, marksmanship can also have an on-demand interrupt and silencing shot, which can be for interrupting heals or other abilities when in a solo scenario. One last thing for marksman is the post-haste ability, which provides some extra mobility. This can prove useful to getting to certain positions faster, which is a small point, but notable nonetheless. Marksman does have a couple of cons. Pets will only have 17 talent points in marksmanship and survival, while in BM they'll have 21. This will provide them with slightly more versatility in their talents. I will have a dedicated section to pets and their talents in a later section of this guide. Because you aren't using kill command in your natural rotation, you also aren't getting as much threat on your pet, which will mean you need to cast Misdirection a bit more in order for your pet to keep holding threat, which is a slight DPS loss since Misdirection itself is still on the GCD. One last major downside here to Marksman is the fact that Marksman may be the lowest performing Hunter spec in terms of DPS at the moment. Their performance in Warcraft logs for tier 11 is extremely low, one of the lowest DPS of any class actually, but that doesn't necessarily mean the DPS you're doing is going to be extremely low. If performed well, Marksman can still be a competitive spec and you can pump out some big numbers. Don't be discouraged by the low performance it has in Warcraft logs. As long as you're performing the rotation correctly, you should be able to kill things as needed. Now about these talents themselves, one thing for all these specs you will see here is that they all make sure to grab the Spirit Bond ability from the BM tree and the Hunter vs. Wild ability from the survival tree for extra stamina. All stamina you have is also reflected onto your pet, and so any gains will also increase your pet health, which will then in turn increase you and your pet's survivability and healing from abilities and mend pet, since they are all healing a percentage of your health rather than a set amount. Other than those two survivability talents, the rest of the talents are not much different from the typical MM rating spec, going for as much damage as possible. If you are going to spec in a silencing shot, I would probably take one single point from Concussive Barrage. The glyphs you choose will not be much different than raiding for the most part, however for marksmen specifically I would make sure to grab the glyph of Chimera Shot, which will reduce Chimera Shot's cooldown by 1 second. Since survivability is the main goal when soloing, anything to reduce the cooldown of ability that heals you, even as low as 5%, is still going to take priority over DPS, so make sure to get this glyph. Every hunter soloing spec is going to get Glyph of Mending and Glyph of Misdirection as well, which will increase Mend Pet's healing by 60% and completely resets the cooldown on Misdirection if used on your pet. Both of these are required for soloing. The final major glyph slot is a bit of a toss-up depending on the fight. Glyph of Trap Launcher is useful if you're using traps on a specific fight, while Glyph of Raptor Strike will be useful in any kind of fight where there is either a strong ability that comes out and you need to reduce the amount of damage that you take from it, or in a kiting phase where the boss completely ignores your pet. Use whichever one is necessary. The minor glyph slots are not as impactful, but Glyph of Feign Death is an absolute must. Beast Mastery spec is a very strong choice for soloing as well. The threat your pet generates will be unrivaled compared to the other two specs due to the extra pet talents and using kill command in your rotation. Because of that, you shouldn't have to use Misdirection as much on single target in comparison to the other specializations. Beast Mastery also has access to the Spirit Beast, which is a pet family that will have a special ability called Spirit Mend. This is a very strong healing hot that you can use to put either on your pet or on yourself, but you must be within 25 yards. This can be a situational ability for soloing where you either don't have access to Mend Pet or you need a strong self-heal that Spirit Bond cannot provide. The extra pet talents will be able to provide you with some extra threat as well as slightly more damage reduction. As stated above, if you're out of range of a Mend Pet or sitting in Feign Death due to a certain mechanic, BM with Spirit Beast's Spirit Mend ability will provide you with the strongest pet survivability without having to cast Mend Pet at all. There are a couple of cons with BM as well. BM doesn't have an interrupt, a lost utility compared to Marksman. BM overall has a very low AoE damage potential in Kata. If you need to kill groups of ads quickly, BM may be your weakest option. An example of this is Kael'thas in the weapons phase. If you have no pet at all, BM is by far the weakest DPS option as well. If you're running BM and not using a Spirit Beast, you also don't have strong self-heals due to not having the Spirit Mend ability. The only self-heal you would have is through the Spirit Bond talent. Last but not least is the ability Kill Command itself. While this is good for pet threat and hits very hard, it requires your pet to be near the target for it to be usable. You should be using this ability in your rotation naturally as your strongest focus dump. If you need to change targets quickly, it is a con to not have a strong hard-hitting misdirected ability off the bat to ensure strong aggro for your pet on multiple targets, and the overall wonkiness of the ability. The only thing that would change from the Marksmanship Talents are the Prime Glyphs, which are the same one used for the BM rating spec. Use whichever does the most damage. Survival, despite being the primary spec chosen for rating as the DPS potential is the highest of any hunter spec, is not the preferred option for soloing, but is still very much possible to do a lot of fights as survival. As stated, the potential damage you can do in survival is better than both of the other specializations, in single target and in AoE. Please make sure to be on top of Misdirects while AoEing in survival. Survival AoE may be strong, but do remember that all that threat is going to go to you unless you have the Misdirect buff up. Pets, especially since you don't have the extra pet talents from BM, are not going to be able to keep up with you in threat without it. The cons of survival are prevalent, sadly. As with Beast Mastery spec, survival doesn't have an interrupt. Of the three specs, survival also has the lowest self-healing, solely relying on the Spirit Bond heals, since it does not have access to Chimera Shot or a strong hot like Spirit Mend from a Spirit Beast. Along with that, it's also sharing similar cons as Marksman, as it lacks the extra pet talents from BM and will lose out on pet threat from not using Kill Command in the rotation as well. The minor and major glyphs remain the same for all three specs. The prime glyphs will be the same as the typical rating glyphs for survival to pump out the maximum amount of DPS. There are several different pets you should consider adding to your collection if you have an interest in hunter soloing. By far the strongest and tankiest option you have available to you is going to be a turtle or a beetle. Both of these options are going to have an extra ability that reduces damage taken for a short period of time, which is an invaluable ability to have when you're trying to have the tankiest pet possible. Both have essentially the same abilities, thus are completely interchangeable. If you prefer the aesthetics of a turtle or beetle, that is completely up to you. The third option of a tenacity pet which I would consider taking is a gorilla. The use of a gorilla is very niche, however the gorilla is the only tenacity pet to have access to an interrupt on a 30-second cooldown, and gives both BM and survival access to an interrupt. In case you were curious, you do have access to an interrupt with a moth pet being the only ferocity pet with an interrupt, however it is on a 1-minute cooldown instead. As mentioned many times before, the Spirit Beast is also a strong choice for soloing if you choose the Beast Mastery spec. Its Spirit Mend is invaluable and may even be required for some fights. Pets have a couple of interchangeable talents depending on the situation. Thunderstomp is an ability meant for AoE threat, which I would personally always take. You do have a lot of control over your own threat with abilities such as Feign Death and Misdirection, so I wouldn't spec into the Guard Dog ability. However, if you are having a lot of trouble with threat or are new when it comes to Hunter soloing, taking this ability may be more impactful for you. Last Stand is an ability just like the ability that warriors have, which will increase its health by 30% for 20 seconds. This can be a very impactful ability when used at the right time, and can save your pet if it's taking a lot of damage from adds or a boss. In trivial content, this ability would not be used. Intervene can be a situational ability that can be used depending on the fight. However, in most fights, it isn't needed. On the fights that it is required, it is definitely needed. It essentially will absorb a strong unavoidable attack used on yourself, and with a 30-second cooldown, this will be needed on solo certain fights. Example of this will be on Eridar Twins and Kill Jaden, however, these fights will definitely not be possible until Firelands or Dragon Soul. With the additional 4 points from BM, you would take all the talents mentioned, and there would be no need for any interchangeability. These are the talents I would take for a Spirit Beast. Anything to help the Spirit Beast be tankier and add additional healing is taken. Due to the Spirit Beast not being a tenacity pet, it will not be as tanky as a turtle or a beetle, but it will actually do a lot more damage. Additional talents are taken for damage since the ferocity tree doesn't have many talents based around survivability. Small section, but the consumables will still be using all the normal consumables you use in raiding, along with 2 additional ones. Flask of the Winds, Skewered Eel as food, Potion of Tolver used as a pre-pot. Mythical Healing Potion may be useful in some situations when taking damage rather than a DPS potion, so may be worth it to save your in-combat potion cooldown. Drums of Forgotten Kings is a consumable you can make with leatherworking, and it gives you a slightly weaker version of the Paladin King's buff. Rune Scroll of Fortitude 2 is a scroll you can use that will give you more stamina as well, substituting as a weaker version of a Priest Fort buff. The positioning of your pet in some fights is an important skill to have in your arsenal. Your pet is like a tank in a dungeon. It does take 90% reduced damage from ground effects, and in a high damage fight you typically don't want to stand in bad. Having a pet move to macro keybound is something you should do. This macro here should be good. Sadly, the @cursor command in macros will not work with the pet move to, so you must press the keybind and then click where you want your pet to move to. Personally, I have Control plus scroll wheel up on my keybind to activate pet move to, and Control plus scroll down will move the pet back to my side and reset the location. Scroll up is my pet attack command, and scroll down is my retreat button. So utilizing the scroll wheel, I am able to have careful pet placement, have my pet attack the right targets, and my pet is able to do all this and retreat at the press of a button. Feign Death as an ability is not only used for threat management, but can also be used to cheese certain mechanics. A lot of the time, certain bosses will have an ability that they cast on players, and this can be completely negated by using Feign Death at the right time. Examples of such abilities are Conflagration on the Eridar Twins, and the Shadow of Death ability on Terran Gorefiend. In the case of Eridar Twins, if you Feign Death, it will reset their cooldown on the ability and will not be able to be cast again until the cooldown of Feign Death is back up again, meaning if you Feign Death every time, it will essentially negate the mechanic. In the case of Terran Gorefiend, when he casts the ability, you must completely stand still and stay Feign Death in order for him to not use it at all. Overall, Feign Death is just another strong utility the hunter has at its disposal to reset your own threat, negate certain boss mechanics, and make sure your pet stays the primary target for anything that will come your way. Misdirection is one of, if not the strongest threat management tool in the entire game. By utilizing Glyph of Misdirection, this ability will essentially have no cooldown, and since the Misdirection buff lasts for 4 seconds, you'll be able to use the ability every 4 seconds. At the beginning of the fight, this initial threat is extremely important when soloing. You want your pet to get as much threat as possible, and then combined with the use of Feign Death, this will ensure your pet has complete threat and won't lose aggro at anything you throw at it. An important thing to note is that men-pet's heals are counted as player threat and not pet threat. After 30 seconds, the threat from Misdirection will fade, so it is important to be utilizing Feign Death before then to ensure that the threat doesn't fade and instantly go back to you. By feigning death, you'll drop all aggro. I hope this guide was a help to anyone looking to do some soloing as a hunter in Cataclysm. Hunter is a very strong class, and if you're looking for some more hunter content in the future, make sure to like and subscribe. Have fun out there, everyone. Peace.